we are back on the way with Dino Katsimetis and more importantly with Todd Bookspan. So I have a kind of a few stories about Todd that I am going to interject as we go, but not until the timing's right. And only because the dude is such an animal in our industry that just kind of deserves to be talked about. So I'm bringing on Todd Bookspan, owner of Win by Noon and mortgage loan officer, entrepreneur extraordinaire. Welcome to the show.
Dino, it is super exciting to be here. And with that intro, I'll do my best to live up to it.
I'll tell you what, man, I just want you to do one thing. I just want you to be better than Savage.
Well, that goes without saying. I got a lot of respect for my good friend Dave, and I'm just here to wow you and hopefully add some value to those who are listening.
Awesome. Well, let's get started, man. You got quite a career, so I have a feeling it might take a while. So let's just get through it. The format of the show is basically I'm going to ask who Todd is today, and then we're going to go all the way back to day one when he first started in the industry and why, and then we're going to hit all the milestones to get back to today again. So, Todd, who are you today, both personally and professionally?
I love it. Personally, I'm a husband and I'm a dad. I'm a girl dad. I got 3 daughters and I have a son-in-law now. So that's super exciting. They're about to celebrate their first anniversary coming up here. And I've been married to my wife, Tara, for 34 and a half years. And just love, I'm a health nut, right? I'm super nerdy on, fitness and this whole longevity thing. So we could certainly really get on a tangent and talk about that. And then, you said entrepreneur. I do consider myself an entrepreneur. I think I've been for a long time, but I think today that's super true. I wear a lot of hats, right? Founder of Win by Noon, super passionate about helping realtors, loan officers, really anyone in sales improve their productivity. We've got our mortgage team that's run by my wife and a business partner. And, they've averaged about $100 million for, I guess, 12, 13 years now. So have a real good streak going there. And I try to pour in to them. And that keeps me relevant, I think, in everything I do with Dave Savage, who you mentioned, and what we do together on the Trust Engine Mortgage Coach YouTube channels. And then I'm just really passionate about the nonprofit that he and I, Kristen Messerly, co-founded together, First Home IQ, financial literacy. I always wanted to be better at that. And the fact that we've got so many ambassadors out there representing us and out there teaching the youth of America how to be a little more financially wise than probably their parents were in most cases. That's a lot of fun. We just launched Modern Mortgage IQ, which is a product which I think will also help us guide people through how to be better loan officers, how to lead teams, how to lead branches with really great content. And so I just feel really fortunate that I get to do all these different things. So I don't get to wake up every morning and just do one thing. I get to wear lots of hats and keep life a little interesting.
Yeah, man. And I got to tell you too, just, like the mortgage IQ, I think what I love about it is it goes beyond just our industry in the way of how many loans have you done, how many units, how many hundreds of millions, how many whatever, right? It actually goes beyond that because it leaves a legacy for years to come. And I think just like we talk oftentimes about the legacy we want to leave for our family, for our children, I think we should all inspire to want to leave a legacy in our industry as well.
Yeah, I never, if you would have said, hey, you're going to leave a legacy for the industry, I never really thought that was an opportunity. I didn't have that big of a vision. And that's one of the things I love about Dave is he's a visionary. And I think I've got a lot of vision as well. I think really big. He just thinks even bigger than most people I know. And so we just have this opportunity to take what we have. I don't talk a lot about my personal wealth journey that often, but as an investor and, I've made some really bad decisions and I've actually made some pretty good decisions as well along the way. And so it's kind of fun to be able to also be able to share that with people as an example of, how you don't have to be that smart or start out with that much money to really make a big difference financially for yourselves. And then hopefully take some of those lessons and use those to help other people make good choices going forward. Because, bottom line is this, life isn't getting cheaper. Nobody wants to have to spend less money. People want to live better lives, more influential lives. And ultimately, we're in the greatest industry in the world to be able to do that and help other people.
I agree. And for those of you that didn't catch it, I think we just found our hook. You don't have to be that smart. You don't have to have a lot of money. And you too can be like Todd Bookspan.
Exactly. Thanks. Exactly what it is, right? I have a friend who has a podcast, and I heard him say that. He said, "Hey, owning long-term real estate has made a lot of real estate agents look smarter than they are." And I was like, "Wow, I kind of resemble that conversation," because ultimately that's how I did it. I built a portfolio of long-term real estate that has, in the end, put me in a different financial position than I was just 14, 15 years ago. And so it's something I feel like it's harder today than it was before, but it's going to never be easier in the future than it is today. If that makes sense.
It does. And that's one of the things that as we proceed here with all the questions that I want to make sure we interweave, because doing a lot of loans is just one aspect of being a loan officer, right? And helping people is another aspect of it. But then what do you do with it? At some point, you also have to mature and realize that, this could stop at any given time. So what are you doing with the money you make? Because the one thing that I would say in our industry that I don't like, that I've seen over and over and over again, is I've seen everybody make a ton of money and then go broke. And, and it's so obvious, just like how quickly somebody drives the nicer car, how quickly somebody wants to fly first class or private, how quickly, somebody is unfortunately doing like bottle service for every little thing they do, right? It's like, come on, man, like be a little bit smarter with your money. And aside from wanting to teach loan officers how to do more loans, right, and how to be better at their profession, I want, through guests like you, to also teach them how to be smarter in their daily lives, so they can set themselves up for success down the road as well.
Well, and I think that's such a great gift, right, for you to bring people on and talk through that. And like I said, I think most people who've made it, some level of success, whatever that is, have failed along the way. And you always hear the people say that they've learned more from their failures from their successes, and I think that's totally true. And I think as we continue to go through these cycles, and we have an opportunity to be better at everything as we go through the next one, right? We were talking financial, certainly can be better financially, but we can also be better business partners to the people we do business with. We can be better leaders to others in our industry, the people we work with, to our families at home. And so there's lots of opportunity always to improve.
Yeah, I agree, man. And I want to move on though and start talking about, the journey and all that, but I want to start with daily routine. And I love the fact that you're on this show because, your whole win by noon really is, it has to be a daily routine that somebody does if they want to win by noon. And it's something that I adopted a long time ago, and I'll even just give you the credit for it. I mean, I was doing it on my own, but I didn't label it as win by noon. And when you started labeling it, I actually adopted it. And it helped me a lot because psychologically, I didn't want to win by 3 anymore or whatever time, right? Or I didn't want to win by the time I go home. I wanted to win by lunch. And that was super helpful for me years ago when you first started it. So, win by noon, we can talk about that for a minute, but I also want to know your personal daily routine, what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I found is, and I think if you look at all the entrepreneurs, the people who are great in business and just really successful in life, they all have pretty legitimate morning routines, right? I mean, everyone has one, they're just not all good, right? And early on, I watched these other folks and I built out, I've had, a million different morning routines over the year. And so I always divide it into personal, and then I also divide it into professional. And because for me personally, I win. Dave Savage, because we've mentioned him a couple times, he's only winning by 7 a.m. right now. He's winning his personal day by 7 a.m. Then he's winning his business day by noon. And that's kind of what I did. I just never really had divided it up into those two different categories. And I'm a little different with my morning routine, so I'll kind of share what it is. I've got you can almost say it's a checklist of things that I do most days. And, I'm not looking to do everything every day, because I think that's where we get stuck. We want it to be perfect, and we want to be perfect, not just once in a while. We want to be perfect every day. And that was me. So I was on that journey of frustration because I couldn't do it all every single day. But I have a very consistent daily routine that includes, depending on the day of the week, right? It could be an hour walk, right? All summer I was doing 4 to 6 miles at a time and in walking every day. I go to a gym called F45. I'm there a minimum of 3 days a week on the resistance days. So I'm trying to build and retain muscle as I get older, because I think that's important for longevity. And then I might mix in a day or two of their cardio, but it's more likely that my cardio choice is going to be a hike with my wife, because that's really the best morning start for me, is going on a hike or a walk with her. It's probably going to include walking the dogs around the block. But the first thing I'm always going to do before I get up, like before my feet hit the ground, is gratitude. I think gratitude is something, if there's one thing that's consistent every single day, it's a minimum of 3 things that I'm grateful for. It is when I open my eyes, or even before I open my eyes. And then it's also when I lay down to bed every night, is just really looking and reflecting on my day. Because I really feel like gratitude has been a huge piece of my positivity and a huge piece of my journey, and really recognizing what's going on. The other things that it includes is going to be reading something that is, for growth, right? It could be reading something spiritual. It could be journaling, but that's like a really rare thing for me. I would love to be a journaler, but it's just not something that I actually do very often, but it's on the maybe list. Drink coffee with my wife. That's a daily thing. It's always gonna be on the list. If it's a day where I'm not going to F45 to do a resistance workout, it's going to be push-ups, sit-ups. It's going to be stretching, most days. And so I just have this list of things that I'm gonna knock off, typically at least half to 80-90% of those. And some days I do it all, and I feel like, oh my gosh, that was the quote unquote perfect day. I don't use perfect as a word very often. I use ideal, because I feel like you're always kind of going there, trying to go. It's like the horizon when I'm driving from Phoenix to Vision in California. It's always moving. It's always moving with me. I can never get there. And so I don't really try to chase perfection, but I try to chase ideal. And then I've got other things, right? I've got the sauna, I've got the cold plunge. Do I do them every day? No, I do them a couple times a week. And so there's just other pieces that I know are there, and I'll always strive to, implement more. One thing that's kind of been unique for me, I used to be the guy who got up at 4 a.m. every morning. I sat there, I worked for 2 hours before my family got up. And that's also I kind of have that old not to-do list, right? I do my best. I'm not perfect at it, to stay off my phone, off my computer, off my email, until a minimum of 7, could be 8 o'clock within an ideal day. And so I'm really trying to also keep myself from getting my brain sucked into that vortex of the other things that we all get sucked into, which typically is news, social media, email. I don't watch normal news. There's only going to be 2 things. When I say news for me, it's going to be, I'll look at, sports on ESPN, because, I'm in that rivalry with my brothers and cousins and nephews for fantasy football right now. So, you got to check a little bit every once in a while what's going on ESPN. And I'm looking at financial news, because I'm still a mortgage guy and I'm an investor. And that's always it. Am I going to watch what's going on in the rest of the world with politics? Heck no. Am I going to watch, the other things that I think other people pay attention to? No, not at all. Unplugged from that. So that's also a big piece of the, hey, heck no, don't do that. And then real quick on the Win by Noon side, that's the business piece. And it was one of those things that I did, right? So Bill Hart was a coach, mentor, still a great friend of mine. And he did a thing called the By Noon effect. And he talked about these different things that people did in order to accomplish their important priorities. And so I had great influences on me that all kind of came in and gave this big push. But ultimately what happened is, when I realized that there was target day activities that I did every day, which weren't unique to me or Win by Noon, that a lot of coaching people have, like, you call your in-process clients and realtors on a certain day, you call pre-approved clients on a certain day, you do annual mortgage reviews on a certain day, and then there's things you have to do every single day, like call leads. You have to follow up on people who've done applications that haven't gotten you stuff. I just prioritized doing that in the morning, because I realized when I reflected back on what I thought was a pretty successful year, that I was getting sucked away. I didn't get those things done every day, because oftentimes I was allowing other people to schedule priorities. They would schedule them typically in the mornings. It was good for them, but it was really my time where I could stay focused. I could get things done. I wasn't distracted. And so that going into the year was 2015. So, now it sounds like a really long time ago. I just made a commitment. My calendar was blocked from 8:30 to 11:30 every day. And unless it was something super, super, super important, like I spoke at a RE/MAX office on the first Tuesday of the month, well, they weren't going to move their meeting until afternoon so I could go there. So I was doing those activities while I was driving out to their office. And then I was doing those activities while I was driving back to my office. And I was doing those activities in the carpool line when I was picking up my daughter later in the day. Those days were the ones that was a struggle to get it done. But I realized that those other days in a flat year where interest rates didn't drop. There was no additional real estate sales in our market, nothing unique to the market. I increased my business about 45%. I broke through a ceiling where I was stuck. I was stuck at about a pretty good number, about $80 million a year, 400 units, and broke through, closed to a little over 550 units, just shy of 115 million. And the only thing I did differently was I was consistent. I did the things that I told people I did, which I did do. I just didn't do them consistently every day. And all of a sudden I did it, got things done. Conversion rates went up, and life was pretty good. And then when I became a coach and had a coaching client, and I was kind of more of a mentor to me. I called him one of my young guns, young kid that a CEO friend of mine wanted me to coach. He's just like, "Coach, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do." And long story short, I told him how I structured my day. I told him how I structured my week. He's like, "Coach, you won by noon." And I was like, "All right," I wrote that down. He's like, "If you could make that into a system, I think I could be successful." And so ever since then, that's what I go out there and preach, especially in sales. If I was an attorney billing by the hour, or a school teacher, or some of these other jobs, they're going to win their day as their day comes. But in sales, we have the ability most of the time to set our schedule. And most of the time, people who do things first thing before they get distracted by everything else win, and win bigger than the rest.
Yeah. And I do want to expand on this, but I want to do it in smaller segments as we walk through.
I know I threw a lot at you. Sorry, Dino.
I'm like, man, this guy should have been a preacher.
Amen. Let me get an amen.
So as we get there, right, and we cross these milestones, I want to kind of go back into these little things, because that's what I think everybody wants to really hear is, how did you bust through from 80 to 115 million? And I think those are going to be valid questions, right? Because there is technique also involved, but sometimes there's also, like you just said a minute ago, I did what I said I was going to do. And I think that's really important too. So let's table that one and get back to it. Just kind of fire these off real quick. Is there a book that has really impacted your life?
Oh, there's been so many books along the way, but probably the one that early on had the biggest impact was The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And the reason that book was so impactful, because again, I sort of talked about up front, you don't have to be the fastest, the smartest person, but if you do the things every day and build upon what you did the day before, you're going to get there further, faster. And I think that, it's one of the things I was really fortunate to get around people who thought big, mentors, coaches, early in my mortgage career, which is my second career. And really influenced me to be this person. I was just so passionate to learn and be better. I don't know that greatness was what I was striving for, but I wanted to be better. And so I think it's also that whole idea of being driven. And I think that's part of what I get from, following Darren. I think he's just a super smart guy, and I've gotten to spend time with him one-on-one, and it's really been a big influence on me.
I think The Compound Effect is something, I know a lot of people already read it. They probably should go back and read it. I believe the majority of the people in our industry want it now. They struggle with little 1% gains every day. But it would behoove you to slow it down a bit. I know in my experience or my journey, it's taken me a while to understand some of this stuff, but sometimes, so Todd Duncan did this at one of his seminars, and it just drove me insane. His whole message was, you got to slow down to speed up. I was like, man, I'm here so I can speed up. I don't want to slow down, right? Like, things are going so good, but I want to bust through that next level. And then finally, like 2 years later, it kind of hit me. If you can just keep hustling, man, and hustling, you'll do fine, right? If you have it in you to do it, you'll do fine. But if you can slow down a little bit, put the systems in place, then incrementally the compound effect takes place, and it just keeps on going and going and going. And the next thing you know, a year's gone by and you've busted through 80 million and you've gotten to 115. And then who knows what the following year, because it has to bring because of the system. So I love that book. I encourage anybody who hasn't read it to make sure you read it. And if it's been a while, you pick it back up again. Next question. What about a quote? Is there a quote that you just love?
It's funny because I talk about quotes a lot, right? I'm terrible at social media, and part of the reason I'm terrible at it is intentional, because when I get on there, I'm like everyone else, right? You just get sucked in, and all of a sudden I'm watching. For me, it's going to be Jason Kelsey videos because, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles guy and he's got his podcast. So I got to be careful. I got to protect myself from that. But I do a lot of, I call it walking and talking. They're just short 2-minute videos. And oftentimes I'll lead off with a quote. But really, I think the one that comes up the most for me is how you do anything is how you do everything. It's a Martha Beck quote. And the reason why is because I find people make excuses all the time, including myself. And as soon as I start making excuses, I realize, well, if I'm making excuses in one place in my life, that tells me I'm making excuses in other places in my life. And so my goal always is to show up as me, show up genuine, be transparent. And I tend to find that as I'm talking to loan officers and real estate agents who are struggling, right? You just said it, that wanted to be like this overnight, aren't willing to build and do the things every day it takes to do without the results until all of a sudden the compound effect and gets there. I tend it's this because they are truly committed to being the best that they can be. And so I just find that, how they do anything is how they do everything.
Yeah, I agree. This one I really like because it kind of brings up things. If you were to write a book, what would the title of the book be?
Oh, come on. It would be Win by Noon. I think I would write a version of Win by Noon for salespeople that really helps them figure out how to identify what those priorities are, right? Because we talked about having systems. And I think the biggest system is that most people don't take time to look backwards and reflect on what they did to see where can I do better? Also to celebrate, hey, I crushed that one thing, right? And then really to spend the time to set up their day, right? And so for me, I call 10 real estate agents a day, and I'm wearing all these hats of all these different organizations that I'm either part of, at a high level or that I run myself. And I have to get a lot done in a day. So when some people are like, well, yeah, but you're not in the weeds of loans. Well, that's okay because I built a team that is in the weeds of loans. And it took me time to get there, but I did it pretty quick because I was intentional about it. And I'm going to call 10 agents a day. Well, if I'm going to, let me say that differently. I talked to 10 realtors a day. That's my standard. It's not dialing 10 because if none answer, then I don't talk to any. It's actually talking to 10 realtors, having a conversation with them every single day. That I'm working, right? If I'm not working, then I'm not going to do it.
For those of you that don't know, he doesn't even do loans anymore, and he still talks to 10 realtors a day.
Well, you know what? We're having interviews and we're interviewing the top loan officers in the country and real estate agents. And so if I'm not talking to realtors and finding out what their struggles are so I can go out there and teach around what I've learned and how they're overcoming those struggles and creating success, then, it just makes me better at what I do. But I have to be intentional every day and say, who's the list of people I'm going to call, right? If I don't have a system for that, then that's the problem people have is that they don't make the calls because they don't know who to call. Sometimes they don't know what to say, but, I'm a certified guide with Phil Jones for exactly what to say. And, Deborah Bird and I have done lots of conversations. If you go to the Win by Noon YouTube channel, you can hear interviews with she and I and Phil Jones where we're talking about conversations that people can have. So we do talk about that a lot in the community, but you still have to know who to call and actually have that conversation with.
Yeah. And I think based again on my experience and everything I've heard from you, you don't just decide that when you wake up in the morning. You make sure you know that from the day before or maybe even the week before. Okay. All right, so let's get into the good stuff. Day one, what the heck possessed you to get into the mortgage business? How, why, where, all of it?
Well, so straight out of college, so my undergraduate degree is in entrepreneurship. So straight out of college, I opened bicycle stores, and I won't bore you all with the decade I spent in the bike business. But I got out of the bike business, I went back to school to get my MBA, and I was actually a stay-at-home dad. And while I was a stay-at-home dad, my best friend got in the mortgage business, and he's like, dude, you should get into business. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to be a business consultant. I'm getting my MBA. I try not to be a jackass too often. I don't know if I can say jackass on your podcast, but I was a jackass that day. But he finally convinced me, because I had two kids, I had two daughters at the time. Now we have three. And we dropped my daughter off at school, and I'd hang out with the stay-at-home moms, and it wasn't a fulfilling life. And then I went to school, the executive program at Arizona State at night, with a bunch of people who were like, CFOs of companies and head of marketing at big publicly traded companies. And I'm like, yep, I'm a stay-at-home dad. And so they all treated me really well because I was a little bit unique. But I had this unique background from being a jack of all trades, master of none from when I had my bicycle store. So I went out and bought pants. I didn't own any long pants, and I went into the mortgage business. And People always laugh because I'm best friends with Dave Savage now, who founded Mortgage Coach. But literally the first day that I got there, they're like, great, we're going to meet at the office and we're going to go to a Mortgage Originator Magazine seminar. So this was in 2001. It was just right after 9/11. And interest rates were just starting to come down, but I didn't go to the office that first day. We went to a seminar, and a guy named Mark Klein got up there. Mark's still in your neck of the woods in California doing business, I believe. And Mark talked about this thing called Mortgage Coach. So I'd never done a loan, and I went and I not only did I convince my company that they should buy a copy of Mortgage Coach, I actually didn't want to share it with anyone else because it was on a disc at the time. And I bought myself a copy of Mortgage Coach, and I really spent I committed to help my friend, who was the assistant to the owner of the mortgage company. More or less, we would call it annual mortgage reviews now, but I was just doing reviews on their loans to see if they could refinance as rates were coming down. I committed to help them for 90 days. And I would go home because I stayed home dad. I had to get my daughter home from school, put her down for a nap. And I whipped out Mortgage Coach on my computer, whatever. I don't even think it was probably something really huge at the time. Because they didn't have small, cool laptops like we have now. And I would do total cost analysis for his clients. And after 30 days, they're like, you got this. You already have all your own loans. And you should just go do this on your own. And so I was really fortunate. I refinanced half my class, and a quarter of the professors, all my stay-at-home mom friends and their families. And so I just had this unique jump into the business that first day because I just got lucky, and I did business differently from day one than most loan officers do.
That's fantastic, man. And that was in Arizona?
That was in Arizona, yes. And so it was just a unique journey that I started on. And I would say the other thing that was kind of unique is I had another really great friend who had bought a property management company at the time. And so the first home that he sold was the first purchase that I financed. And I worked with a lot of investors. And so I had owned a rental property at the time. I had moved to Phoenix. I went to school at U of A in Tucson, and which I know you've been there recently. And that's where my bike shops were. And so I came back up here, and so I was up here in Phoenix, but my friend from Tucson had opened up this property management company, and I still own my first house that I bought with a house hacking strategy. That's what we call it today. But my first house that I bought when I was a student at U of A was my rental down there. And so I understood investing in real estate. I understood numbers because I was getting my MBA. I thought I was a lot smarter than I was. I had this cool software Mortgage Coach, and then I was able to actually build a business helping investors understand how to integrate loans better into what they were trying to achieve financially.
So, okay, all sounds great. But for a brand new loan officer, how did you go meet these investors? How did you get in front of them?
That's a great question. And it was interesting because I actually was ironically in California yesterday for the day, in your neck of the woods. I spoke to about 50 real estate agents, and one of them said, well, how would you meet investors? And I said, well, I would go to your local Real Estate Investors Association. They call them RIA. So ASRIA, Arizona Real Estate Investors Association. And I went there to learn alongside of investors, right? I didn't know. I owned a rental property. Most of them didn't. Some of them were crazy great. But I went there to meet investors. And oh, by the way, my friend owned a property management company. Guess who he managed houses for? Investors. And so it's just really, one is to gain the knowledge. A great book on investing is called Hold, H-O-L-D. It's part of the Keller Williams series. It's written by a few friends of mine, and I think it's a really good nuts and bolts, but you just have to study it and know it. So first off, you have to know what you're talking about. Certainly doesn't hurt if you own investment properties, right? Because then you sound a little bit more legitimate, but you don't have to. I owned one. It wasn't that impressive at the time. But I showed up at real estate investor events. I went and I invested my time to learn alongside of them and made myself a resource to help them understand loans. I wasn't cheesy. I didn't go around handing a business card to everyone, but I went around the room and I shook hands and I met people. And guess what? My property manager friend, he was trying to meet investors to manage their property. So, we were able to also say, hey, by the way, Dino, meet my friend Scott, who's a property manager. Hey, Scott, Dino is about to buy his first investment property. So you may be able to find someone. I don't know too many loan officers, if any, who are going after property managers, but it's a great opportunity, especially if you're in an appreciating market. As rates come down, investors who want to buy more property are going to want to take cash out of some of those homes. And so you'll have an opportunity to see if you can't serve them or at least help them with their next transaction. But that's where I would start. Go to real estate investing meetings.
How old were you back then?
I was 32-ish, 33-ish. So again, second career. I wasn't, and I always laugh because I wore slacks and I wore a tie, a long sleeve shirt, not a suit at the time, decent shoes, but it was from Marshalls and Ross. I mean, I was, we were getting by, right? I was a stay-at-home dad. My wife worked, so I was really fortunate to have her support. But definitely different financial times back then.
Yeah. Also different times. Are you wearing some shorts now?
I'm wearing jeans today, but I would have been wearing shorts, just because the jeans were just sitting out, I didn't have to fold them as like lazy laundry day.
I've only worn pants and closed-toed shoes maybe 3 times in the last 4 months. I love it now.
Yeah, I do wear closed-toed shoes, but like my daughter got married, I went out and bought a new suit. I didn't own a suit. I stopped. I think we've all gone through that. I think one of the beauties of our businesses now is you don't have to look like a banker. You don't have to wear a suit. I did that. I never met with clients that much at that time. It just made me feel like I had a real job, and I went in there. I dressed nicer, I think, than most of the people in the office. I did the full suit thing for a number of years. Then I did the sport coat, slacks, no tie thing. And then I eventually got to jeans and the sport coat. And then now, it's a win by new t-shirt every day. It's a lot easier. Yep, exactly.
And it's funny, income.
that too. That too.
So that first place you worked at, were you a banker or a broker?
Great question. Broker. Was a broker. And again, this is where people are like, oh my gosh, Todd, you got so lucky. Well, guess what? I helped one of the investors that I met. He was actually one of the investors of the property manager, and I refinanced 24 of his single family homes for him onto 15-year fixed loans. And I ran into troubles because Washington Mutual was so slow in underwriting at the time that they weren't going to extend my locks, and I was going to lose the locks on all of these loans. And luckily they did the right thing, and they extended the locks. But my processor hated me because every time we changed one thing in one file, she had to go change it in 23 other files. And they were all tiny loans too. I don't think any of them were even over $100,000, but nonetheless, it was a great experience. But I realized at that point, for me, broker wasn't. I know you're a broker, so I don't want to, but it wasn't the right channel for me at the time. I actually went from there to a correspondent lender. I've done it all: correspondent lender, broker, true bank, and direct lender. And so I think there's great channels out there for everyone. And I'm a fan of all the channels. I think you just have to figure out what's best for you.
I think that's it right there. I mean, quite honestly, right, I'm obviously a fan of being a broker. I do love it. I think it's a lot more fun. But I think if you're a good loan officer and you have the drive, you will be successful at any channel, whatever you're doing, right? You will be the one that's successful, not the channel that you're in. So anyways, moving on now. So we got you started. You had some instant success, which most people don't. Great way to get started. What was your first milestone that you hit? When I say that, I mean you're now starting to get busy. What did you do to get busier? What was the catalyst that took you to that next level?
Well, one is because of the fact that I went to this Mortgage Originator magazine seminar, right? At that time, they came through every 6 months. And so what I would say is you got to look for what can you plug into from an event perspective where you can learn. And now it's all online. So I think you have these opportunities to figure it out. But for me, there was a few things that I did different from the start. I had my friend who was a stay-at-home mom whose kids were best friends with our kids. I had her be my assistant. And so back then, you printed loan applications, you highlighted where people had to sign, you would stick them in envelopes, you would mail them to them. Well, that was her job. She would come in and she would do that for me, and then she would put them into my ACT database. So I got a database right away, and I had an assistant right away to do the things that I didn't want to do or wasn't good at. And so I think that that's always a hard thing, but I invested in myself early on. And then every 6 months, someone new showed up at a Mortgage Originator magazine, and I got it. So I got what was the predecessor to MBS Highway, was whatever Barry's original product was. So I got that to the next one, and I became an expert in understanding mortgage-backed securities because Barry teaches them to you in his product. And so I got really good at having conversations with people that were elevated because I understood the market. 6 months later, right, he said, hey, my buddy Tim Ibrahim's going to come through. He's got a thing called Loan Toolbox. And so I got Loan Toolbox, which had scripting samples. Again, that's the Mortgage Coach YouTube channel today, right? And then now they've got Loan Atlas, which is probably, I haven't seen the inside of it too much, but Friends with Josh Medler, who's pouring a lot of his time and energy and best stuff into there. And so, there's these great products. And in there, I listened to an interview with Daniel Harkavy, and I got a coach, and that was Bill Hart, and that changed everything for me. And so I just think it's the whole idea. I was a continual learner. I was continually investing in myself. And, although some people might say I got lucky, I took a lot of risk. I hired a full-time person in my first year, full-time, someone who'd been in the business for 20 years, who made me better, because all of a sudden I joked, it was a processor with a personality. She had been a loan officer and could do loans at a high level, could talk to people, but she hated to go out there and hunt for the relationship. So if I literally could do the initial call, hand it off. She would do everything, comes back. I could do my mortgage code TCA, and then boom, off and do that. And so you just really have to think through what's your path. That path is easier today than it was before. And because a lot of that stuff is free. And so really what you have to do is get really good at discerning what's the number one thing I need to learn today that would make me better. What's the number one system I'm missing, right? You talked about systems earlier, right? What's the number one strategy I'm missing? And just focus on one thing at a time, get good at it, and then move on to the next. I do think that there's so much overwhelm right now. I mean, there's just so much great free content out there. You just have to pick what you want and run with it.
So there's a couple things there that I want to both point out and talk a little bit about. You hire your first person within the first year, and that's typically one of the milestones I want to get out of people, because all too many loan officers are always afraid to do that. And I know just from my own experience, again, the minute I hired my first personal processor, immediate change in my business. The moment I hired my first personal assistant, immediate change in my business, right? Like it does matter. And there's a piece there where I think there's a little bit of pressure. Like I have to feed this person, right? Like I have to make enough money to cover this, but don't allow yourself to have so much fear that you can't take a risk, or as Todd said, to invest in yourself. You have to be able to invest in yourself if you want to grow. And I can tell you, after all these years of doing this, trying to do everything yourself doesn't work. You could make money, you could be just fine, but you can't ever get to the next level if all you're doing is working hard, trying to do everything yourself. I can tell you right now, first of all, there is somebody else out there that can be a better processor than you. Bottom line.
Yes.
And I can tell you right now too, there's somebody else out there, sure, that can be a better personal assistant than you to yourself, but even more importantly, somebody out there that should be a personal assistant to you, so you're not doing it. One of the biggest obstacles I ever had to overcome was not checking my own email. Like, oh, that was so difficult for me the first time I had to do that. And now I pride myself on going into my Outlook and seeing only like a handful of emails that I have to look at. It's the greatest thing in the world, because it frees up your time to do what you need to be doing as a good loan officer, right? Or whatever it is that's important to you that you want to do. You can't do it all. So pick what you like to do, pick what you're good at doing, and most importantly, pick the things that make you the most money. Let everybody else do the rest. So I'm glad you said that. And that is quite impressive that you did it in the first year. It usually takes people many years to do.
Well, I would say a couple of things on it. Number one is like you nailed it. Like, what are you good at? Like I've never run DU, right? I never learned to read tax returns at the time to help people qualify. It was not. I viewed that as not a good use of my time. Guess what? I mean, I understand tax returns because I have to understand my own tax return, and so you have to. At that time, again, I was working with people that were awesome humans. They were great people, but they were like, man, kind of made fun of me for having an assistant, right? They didn't want me to hire. I tried to hire this person as my own processor because that was my bottleneck, and they wouldn't let me. They had her be my assistant, which was the greatest gift, because having her fit that role and have more flexibility in that role with me was a game changer. So, but what I would say is flip that to current day, right? So, because people are like, Todd, that was a long time ago. That was over 20 years ago. But that's why I think organizations like what you've built, Dino, are so important for people, right? You've built an organization where your goal is to help loan officers grow their business by providing a lot of those services for them. So what I would be encouraging a lot of you is to be looking at people like Dino, who I think are leading this trend in the industry to helping loan officers be better. And I think there's always this fine line that people walk when they get in the business, because you got to make money, right? But what people forget is that it's not the top line that matters, it's the bottom line that matters. And then how can you do that and still have a life? And how can you still, do other things? The first time I was on stage for Todd Duncan was to be interviewed about the fact that I'd spent the previous 2 years, 50 days with no cell phone, no email, on vacation. Not all at once, but, split up, because I felt like that was where I spent all my money. I drove a Ford Expedition. It wasn't anything very fancy, big red. Drove a long time, 120,000 plus miles, but we had kick-ass vacations because that's what I wanted for my kids. And that was the experience that we had. And then the market shifted and I had to go back in and I had to work really hard. And it wasn't the same when the financial crisis hit. But I would just encourage you to think, well, what Dino just said a few minutes ago, and I would think about looking at organizations like his that are built and designed to help you grow. I mean, that's how we built our team. I built a team where they don't have to do those hard things. We built a team where they can come in and focus on their unique ability, right, on their genius zone, and do those things. And I love that you're doing that too, Dino.
Thank you, man. Yeah. What I found is there's a lot of loan officers that need to be coached, and they're taking the risk to be a loan officer, but they don't know how to get to that next level, and they need to be coached up and pushed just a little bit to go ahead and take that risk. But there's a lot of loan officers that, let's just call them average, and they can still make a great living being an average loan officer in the mortgage industry, right? I mean, my gosh, just doing 2 loans a month in California, granted, I'm a little jaded with our things here, our values here, but even just 2 loans a month, you can actually make a better living than most people we do loans for. So there's this opportunity, though, that if you don't have enough volume to go out and hire your own person, if you don't have enough of what it takes to go do all that stuff, plugging into the right system with the right company so that you can have access to all of that, or maybe a shared access to, to a personal processor or a personal assistant, because setting up all of the right things, the right systems to be able to produce properly, one, will help you to produce faster, which is super important. But number 2, it will put you in the right environment that will help create the opportunities to do this. And I don't know how to explain that in 30 seconds or less. I'm not going to try right now, but you got to put yourself in the right opportunity to be able to succeed. And then you have to get coached or seek advice from people like Todd as often as you can, because it's those little nuggets all the time that if you can just let those penetrate your mind, you will start making these positive changes that will not just help you do more loans, but help you have a better work-life balance, which I'm going to raise my hand and say I had 0 work-life balance for the majority of my career. And then when I finally figured it out, I realized how much I sucked as a husband and a father and a friend, and I now look back and I get bummed at so much of what I did wrong that I want to go, 100 miles an hour into helping other people not do that. So
I think that's always the hardest thing, right? I had my first quote that Bill Hart made me memorize was, we all must suffer from one of 2 pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret, while discipline weighs ounces, regret weighs tons. It's a Jim Rohn quote. And I believe this. I can't rewind the clock, right? I mean, I made so many mistakes that I can't change those. But what I can do is I can talk about the changes I made and hopefully influence other people. I had lunch with a financial advisor last week, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe Riker is 6." And he said, "You know what? I started doing that thing I heard you talk about, and I drive him to school every day." I drove my kids to school every day. I was so lucky, and I had one child who did me wrong, and she got her driver's license when she was 16. The others did, and I drove my kids all through high school to school every day. And I had a unique relationship with my children because I could spend that time focused on them. I wasn't on the phone, but I made mistakes. I made the rule where I wouldn't talk on the phone in the house. And then I got in the car, and I can just still look in the rear view mirror and look back and see my little daughter when she's a lot younger. She's a school teacher in Manhattan now. She's 25. She said, hey, and of course we go out to the car. I hop on the phone because I'm not in the house anymore. She's like, hey, Dad. I'm like, yeah, what, hon? She's like, do you think we could do that no phone in the house thing in the car too? And I was like, oh, like dagger to the heart. But I was like, okay. And it's just funny. I talked to another realtor last week. Same thing. He's like, where do you think I am? I'm like, I don't know where you are. It's 11 o'clock on a Thursday or Wednesday, whatever it was. He's like, I'm in the school line to pick up my kid. I get here an hour early so I can be one of the first 8 cars, because that way he sees me in the driveway when he comes out. I get here, I get to put myself in this bubble that I get to make phone calls for the hour I sit here. But I'm not in a long line. I'm not frustrated by sitting there, and I get to do this. When he gets in the car, I get to be 100% with him. And so I'm like, gosh, these little things where I've, had some small little influence on someone and their relationships to go forward. That's great, because guess what? I did a pretty good job there, but it was far from perfect.
Yeah, that's great, man. Okay, so we've gotten through your first year. You managed to hire 2 people, it looks like, right? A personal assistant and a processor or /personal assistant.
Well, I got rid of the part-time. The stay-at-home mom was gone. I just had the other one person, but okay. She was doing all those things. But yes, I evolved into a full-time assistant.
And how many hours a day were you putting in?
Oh, it was really interesting for that during that time, because I dropped my daughter off at school, and she was one of those kids that was like me, that didn't want me to leave. Like when my mom dropped me at kindergarten, I grabbed onto her leg and she kind of had to drag me across the floor until they could peel me off of her leg. So I actually would play on the playground with her. And there was another mom whose son wouldn't let her go. And so literally the bell rang. I walked her over to the teacher. She would go into class, and luckily the mortgage office was pretty close down the street. And then I picked my kids up at 2:30 because I was still a stay-at-home dad. So it was one of those things where I think you also have to own who you are and what you have to do. It's a little different today where people work from home and it's normal and dogs bark and kids cry. But back then that wasn't a thing. Everyone worked in an office all day. And so I was in an office. Ultimately, I worked about 5 to 6 hours a day. I did my best to get out during the day and go to lunch events and whatnot. My school was at night. But normally if someone called me in the afternoon, again, this is when I'd pick up the phone and we'd be on the playground. I'd pick up the phone and we'd be, running around at, doing something, crazy. Cause, I try to have a lot of fun with my kids. And so, yeah, it wasn't, so I worked at night. So I did a lot of work at night. Everyone would go to bed. I was a little bit of a night owl then, and I would work after. But so I didn't work, 50, 60 hours a week. I was probably working, realistically 40 hours a week. It was just a little different than what other people's jobs look like.
Yeah, so not bad. And were you still at the same mortgage company you were at when you started?
Yes. I made it there a little over a year, and then, then just realized that there was, a better opportunity. I thought, wasn't a great opportunity. Once I got to the second place, I was like, gosh, how quick can I get out of here? But it was part of that stepping stone. Because ultimately what I didn't find was people who were like-minded to me. Ironically, until I got to that company, I met someone who you may know, Michael Regan, who's a coach at Building Champions. And Michael got in the mortgage business while I was there. We got to meet each other, and ironically, we went our separate ways from there to different companies, but we stayed dear friends, and we got together once a week, and we talked strategy and process. I found someone who thought like me, acted like me, wanted to do business like me, that I could bounce ideas off of. And then I went to Todd Duncan's events. I went to these other things where I could learn from other people. And luckily eventually made friends in other states that I could get this from. Cause I know they were here in Arizona at the time. I just couldn't find them where they weren't willing to share. Yeah.
So then let's kind of fast forward a little bit. What was the next big milestone?
Oh gosh. I think probably the next big milestone was the financial crisis, right? Because I was on the edge of that person that you just talked about at the beginning, the person who made a lot of money and spent a lot of money. I didn't really have people pouring into looking over my shoulder and saying, hey, the market's slowing down, right? At that point, I had 4 or 5 employees at the time. I had 2 processors on my own. I had an assistant. I had someone who was kind of like a pre-underwriter, getting loans ready to go and helping me with marketing.
And how many houses did you have at that time?
I'm sorry, how many what?
How many houses did you own?
I owned 5 at that time. And so I was just kind of getting rolling, but I didn't, although I was talking to investors and I was doing those things, I didn't have the handle on my personal financial house that I needed to have, because what I wasn't doing was looking where the market was going. I'm the eternal optimist, right? Glass half full all the time. And so what I should have been doing was maybe thinning out the people, but I had this immense desire to not screw up their lives. They were lone people. It's going to be hard to get another job. They all had kids. So I kept them employed probably longer than I should have to make it through the financial crisis. But I think that was really it. It was a big learning lesson for me to be wiser with money. I literally can go back to that time and tell you every penny I've spent in QuickBooks. Not necessarily a good thing or something to brag about, but I got really smart of where my money went. I went through the financial crisis with those 5 houses. I was worth negative almost $1 million. And then slowly in 2010 started climbing my way back out of it. I still own those 5 houses, but they're not worth negative $500,000 anymore. They're, probably plus $1 million and change, right? So, those kind of things, that's that quote that, owning real estate for a long time makes you look smarter than you are. But I think that was probably the next thing for me, was really just getting slapped in the face and told I wasn't as good as I was. I mean, again, luckily I didn't drive a fancy BMW, thought about it, but then I had that lecture with my daughter. She's like, why don't you have a cool car like this guy? And I'm like, well, because this car's paid for it. So luckily I had that conversation, because I was looking at the used BMW at the time, not a new one, but I was like, gosh, so there's a few things I got lucky at that I made wise decisions on. And so we scraped through the financial crisis. I won't bore you with all the details, but it was most months me saying to my wife, hey, these 2 credit cards, you can put this much of groceries on this one and this much of anything else on this other one, and I get paid in 10 days. This is all you got. And so we were up to our eyeballs in debt and thankfully worked our way out of it.
So I'm gonna pause for a second, because to a lot of people, that's exactly kind of their story right now.
Okay.
They may not be negative because housing didn't drop the way it did back then, but by all means, they're holding up the 2 credit cards and they're trying to make it through this period of time. It's unfortunate because a lot of loan officers have absolutely struggled during this period of time, and I hope that, for those of you that haven't been around, I mean, people say this is worse than 2008. I think 2008 was way worse because, no matter how bad business might be today, if you own a home or 2 or whatever it is, at least those have continued to go up. Versus in 2008, not only were you not making any money, but every single investment you had was basically completely worthless. So this isn't as bad. And listening to Todd and listening to his stories right now, it could possibly, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, I think maybe you think it was a good thing that you went through all that because it made you a better person.
Oh yeah, it made me a better person. But I was embarrassed by it, right? The only reason I started talking about it is because people are repeating it again over, and it made me mad. It made me mad that I saw loan officers who made $500,000, $800,000, $1 million during the rate drop during COVID that are now flat broke, and it made me mad. And so I just said, gosh, I have to probably talk a little bit more about my story, the thing that I'm embarrassed about, and let other people know that there's something good on the other side if you can just change behavior, make different decisions going forward. Because it was tough, right? And I owed money to my dad at the time. I had the credit card debt. I had these negative houses. So it was a lot of things all stacked up on each other. And I'm not proud of it. In 2010, we bought a house with 5% down, and I literally had to close on the day after I got paid. So I had enough money to do the 5% down. And then we had a contractor who was going to do some renovations, and he's like, hey, I need to get a deposit. I'm like, great, I give you to this next day, which was the day after my next payday, right? And I just slowly built myself up, and I said, well, wait, this is crazy. You can't live like this. And that's when I said, okay, great, got to build that cash cushion, right? Got to have the 3 months savings in the bank to start. 6 months is better. Okay, let me get there before I go out and do other things. And then as I made more money, invest a little money here. Oh, great, I can take that money now and I can buy a house. Oh, look, I can take this money and I can buy a house. And so I just made these other decisions that have thankfully led me to where I am. And then, we had this gift, those of us who've been in the business for a number of years, of low rates during COVID, where we did a lot of loans, and, we probably made a lot of money. And then, this time I didn't use that to do cool things. I still live in a less expensive house than most of my friends. I just own a lot more houses than most of my friends. I still drive a Ford Expedition, not Big Red, not the same one. I kind of laugh that's what I have. And so, again, I just live differently, and that's okay with me. I don't say it to brag. I don't say it to do anything else. Not trying to impress anyone. I'm trying to impress upon people that you can do things differently. And I think it's hard, right? I mean, I'm not out there trying to build my career. I don't need to look or feel a certain way. The years I made the most money, I should say it, I drove a Prius. And people were like, is Todd environmental? Or, because this was before Tesla's around, is Todd environmental or is he cheap, right? But I drove a Prius for a long time. And again, my daughter was supposed to get it when she turned 16. And this was my oldest daughter. She didn't get her driver's license until she went off to college. So I got stuck driving the Prius until the second one turned 16 and I could give it to her and go out and buy a different car. It was an okay car, but it wasn't, it was a nice car. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't what I see people spend money on today.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. I hope all of you can take some of this and understand that just this word humility can go a long way. And it as you get older, what's that quote? I do the things today that nobody wants to do, so that tomorrow I can do the things that those people can't do.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, I may have chopped it up a little bit, but it's something like that. And bottom line is like, if you're making money right now in the loan business, well, maybe not today, right? As much as you have in the past, but that market is shifting. You will be there again. Think about that word humility. Think about the things that are important. Think about what the future looks like, and live in today, in the moment, right? Enjoy that, especially for that work-life balance that we're talking about here with your family. But think about tomorrow. Don't put it all on today and not save anything for tomorrow. Think about the investments you made. I mean, Todd, the number's kind of staggering if I think I know it right, but how many houses do you own now?
I own 26.
26 houses, you guys. So I'm kind of guessing that Todd doesn't need to be calling 10 real estate agents every day today. He just does it because he's disciplined and he probably is a little bit of a freak. I don't know, but he's doing just fine, right? Like, he's doing great. And this is the thing that our industry has for you. It has the ability for you to be set up in a way that others just can't, right? You can't do that kind of stuff just having a regular job. You have an opportunity here. You got to treat it like a business. It is your business, no matter where you work. If you're a broker or banker, no matter where you are, treat it like a business. Do the right things, set it up, have humility, and then have a plan and win by noon every day. And if you do all of that, then the future you will be extremely happy.
And even if you don't win by noon, just win the day. Do the things that you need to do. Know what you need to do today, and then get it done. If it takes you till 6 o'clock at night, it takes you till 6 o'clock at night, right? And I think that's it. I mentioned the word standard before. If I only, had quality conversations with 12 realtors today, but let's pretend it was only 8 so far. And then, I got commitments after this. And so if I only got 8 done today, tomorrow I would do 12, right? So I don't say, oh, I didn't win today. Or even if, yesterday I had conversations with over 40 realtors yesterday. Well, I could just say, well, I don't need to call anyone today because I already talked. I'm over my number for the week because I am. But I don't care what I did yesterday or the day before. My goal is every single day to have those 10 conversations. And if I have one day where I don't hit 10, guess what? I add that shortfall to the next day. And so I think that's also one of the things I do a little different than other people is I'm really I've committed that's a standard I'm going to hit, right? So I'm big on words like commitment. I'm big on words like standard. I'm big on words like being intentional, just things that I think that I want to show up and do because, how I show up here is how I show up everywhere, right? Goes back to that quote we talked about.
Okay. So Todd, let's and I know we're going a little bit over, and if you have time, I want to just dig into this one because you're really, I think, connecting with a lot of people here. And I love your message because it's really my message. 2008, I totally crashed, lost everything. And I've always said starting over at zero would have been a complete blessing, but I had to start at 6 feet under because I let myself get in so deep. Right. And it took so long, and it man, was it hard. That once I got back to that ground zero, just being able to see the sun and taking a deep breath, that was amazing, right? And from there, I learned to have humility, and I learned to change how I do a lot of things. So I want to encourage all of you guys, especially during the season that we're in right now. I mean, we are in the winter still. It's coming though, man. I can see the sun poking through those clouds, and it's coming. Spring is around the corner, and you're going to be doing just fine. So hang in there. Seek advice all the time, right? I know Dave Savage has and you all the time have your guys' YouTube channels up and social media up. So I encourage everybody to, go seek out advice. And Todd said this earlier, invest in yourself. And that is, believe it or not, investing in yourself by you taking some time to seek advice from other professionals and coaches. I think coaching is a huge thing. And if you can't afford coaching right now, guess what? Logging in and watching some of these interviews, that is coaching. It's the exact same thing. So you'll be fine with that. But Todd, I want to ask you this one big question. Granted, you're a little bit older, you're a little bit wiser, right? So
older at least, yeah.
No, wiser too. I can tell. I can see that gray hair. I know you're wiser. 2 questions for you. One, if you could do anything over again, how would you do it? What would it be? And then 2, if you were brand new and we were going to take you and just drop you off in the middle of somewhere and you don't know anybody, what would you do to become a successful loan officer?
Wow, I think it's a great question, and I think we've hit on a lot of the things that I would do. I would, first off, I'm a big believer in vision, right? You really have to think about what's the vision you want for your life and what's the vision you want for your business. So think big picture, right? So I would, if I was starting off right now, and again, if you've got kids, you're going to get up a couple hours earlier on Saturday and Sunday, and I would just really think through the categories of your life. And I would think through, what are the things in my life I want? What is a relationship I want? Whether if you've got a spouse, what's that relationship? What I want to look like? If I've got kids, what do I want that relationship to look like? What do I want my finances to look like? Right. So start with you and where you want to go. And this is what I learned from, I'll give credit where credit is due to Daniel Harkerby from Building Champions. That was one of the interviews that I listened to in Loan Toolbox that kind of impacted my life. If you go to the Win by Noon YouTube channel, I do have a life planning session I taught on there. With Daniel's permission, I taught his content. You got to start there. And then you have to think about, what's the business I want to build, right? And you got to think through, what is that? Like, you asked me how many hours I worked, right? There were times where I worked 50, 60 hours a week, right? So I had those times. It wasn't, the financial crisis. I mean, we all worked those crazy hours because we were just trying to figure out what can we do to make it work when you got $50,000 foreclosure properties all around us. Wasn't smart enough to buy those $50,000 foreclosure properties, but I helped a lot of other people get wealthy by doing it. And so really just thinking through, what do I want? What do I want my business to look like, right? And so that's when I got a coach, what they forced me to do. And I literally drew out the team that I really built over the next 10 years by having a really clear business vision. And then I would just figure out, how do I get clear on what are the gaps that I have there? And so I would look at my calendar every week. I call it the ideal week. I would literally write it in my planner. Here's what my days look like, right? Darren Hardy would call it a calibration meeting. Are there things I got to punt off my calendar because it's not that important? And are there things on there that are missing? Do I need to make more time of? But I would schedule time with yourself to work on your business of whatever that skill is. That's the first and most important thing. Like I mentioned before, again, I just fell into the mortgage coach thing, and it just happens that Dave is my friend now and was your first guest on the podcast. But whatever it was, I got great at doing a TCA. And I got great at having an annual mortgage review conversation before I knew what that was. And if that was important to you when Dino's talking about these refis maybe coming, guess what? You can absolutely go onto the YouTube channel for Mortgage Coach and find annual mortgage review conversations on there. Whole calls on it, right? That was my thing. That's what Dave interviewed me before we were friends about all the time. And that conversation hasn't changed very much over the years. And so figure out what is it you need to do and schedule time to learn it. And then just make sure it's in your calendar, right? I would just, that's what I would be doing. And if I got dropped off in a place where I knew nobody, I would still do that first, but then I would just think about, how do I surround myself with someone great? I would be looking and seeing, okay, I live in Orange County. Hey, this Dino guy's there. And I would be calling up Dino, and I'd be going in and seeing if I could buy Dino lunch, or, Dino probably wouldn't let you buy lunch. He'd probably buy you lunch. And I'd figure out, what is he doing? And maybe he's someone I could go to work with that could teach me this. And I'd be looking around, who are the great people in your market that you could go there and maybe learn from them, shadow them for a day and figure out what they are. And then, it's, I heard an interview with a guy named Ben Kinney. Ben owns a thing called Place. It's this global behemoth. I think it's worth $1 billion as the valuation with his Goldman Sachs investment. But this was back when he was a brand new realtor. He said, I put myself in the path of opportunity. And so you got to figure out where would I put myself in the path of opportunity. I don't know that I'd go out and do the ASRIA thing I did again. I just lucked into that. It was something that I resonated with me personally. But there's lots of realtor events going on. The hard part is so many are on Zoom now, but I would figure out where's a realtor event that's being put on by a title company, right? So I don't crash a loan officer's event. Or if you're going to crash a loan officer's event, call them. We're doing a 500 person realtor event coming up. And guess what? I have 4 or 5 loan officers that have bought tables at my event that they're going to bring their best realtors to. And guess what? I shine love all over them for being brave enough to show up, but they have our permission to do that. So make sure you have permission. But I would be putting myself in that path of opportunity to figure out where could I meet the realtors that I need to meet in order to get the business I need to get. And then the last thing I would throw out there is, figure out something. Check out First Home IQ. Because there's great content in there, and that's content that you can take out and teach, right? We've created content that's easy for you to use and go out and teach. And if you can teach something, a class on financial literacy, you could probably get into almost any real estate office, closed or otherwise, to teach it. So I don't know, that's a lot. Dino, what did I miss?
No, I think it's good. I got 2 quick stories to tell just because I loved what you said. So what he said was go seek people that maybe you want to be like and, that you admire for whatever reason, and then go see if you can take them out to lunch, right? So two quick stories. One, even after all these years of being in the business, I don't know, 7 or 8 months ago, I actually did that. I called up a guy named Al Hensling. He's just down the street from me, about 30 minutes. The dude's a total stud. He's been around forever. I mean, he was kind of an old dog when I first got in the business, and he's still doing loans. He's still cranking over 100 million, probably I think closer to 200 million a year. I'm sorry, just his own personal production. And he's got an extremely successful mortgage company with over 100 loan officers. I'm like, you know what? This dude's doing something right. And he's a total stud on top of it. So I should get to know him, and I just want to ask him questions. And I did. I called him, I emailed him out of the blue, and he actually called somebody that I knew to make sure I wasn't a total psycho. And then he decided to accept the lunch offer, and we went out to lunch, and he let me just drill him with questions. And it was a big day for me. I got to meet somebody I admired. I got to ask somebody a ton of questions that I respected, and I learned a lot from it. And then second story is my partner here at the company, a guy named Mike Menino. He called me out of the blue several years ago now, and he said, "Hey, I'm really new in the industry, and I have this client with this one particular loan that I don't know how to do." And he said, "I would love it if I could give it to you so you could do it, because I want this client to be taken care of." And I laughed a little bit because you don't get that too often, and I said, "Well, what's the loan like?" Then I laughed again. I said, "It's really not that hard, because I don't know how to do it. I've never done it." He was still fairly new in the business. I said, "I'll tell you what, you do the loan. I'll just teach you how to do it. I'll walk you through it the whole way." And he still said, no. I'd rather you do it and walk me through it so I could learn, but I want you to take it, right? I thought, man, this dude's, I respected him because he cared more about his client than he did the paycheck. And he wanted to make sure that his reputation was positive at the end of it all, even if it meant not doing the loan, right? So I respected that. I think it was like 24 hours later, he calls me back up and he's like, "Would you ever consider coaching me?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man, I don't really have that much time, but it's interesting. And it's something that I've always loved doing," right? I said, "So listen, if you want to do it, the only time frame I have available is every other Wednesday at 6:30 in the morning." He's like, "No problem." So we met for probably a good 2 years, every other Wednesday at 6:30 in the morning for breakfast. And that was his coaching. And then 2 or so years later, I kind of went through a thing where I thought I was on the back nine, so to speak, and I was going to, take it easy. I didn't want to be working as hard and all that. And I needed somewhat of an exit strategy. And for me, it was my exit strategy because for those of you that don't know, I had a medical scare about 2.5 years ago now, and I had double vision. So for a while there, I was wearing this patch because if I took it off, I would see two of everything, and we weren't sure what was happening. It was like, so I was doing all these tests. I spent probably like $50,000 in 3 months, which is a little excessive, but let me tell you something. Seeing double everything was kind of way too much to handle. Side note, the only positive, and I turned to my wife and I said, babe, can you take off your top for me? That was the only positive of the whole thing, right? And she was kind enough to do that for me just because she saw how sad I was with my double vision thing. But I ended up, after all these years of being with the guy, and he learned all of my secrets, right? He learned everything that I did. He became, in a very short period of time, a top-notch loan officer. I call him version 2.0 of me because he's taken everything I taught him and he's actually made it even better. So I love the guy. He's been fantastic. So here's a guy that called somebody up randomly, right? And offered to give him something, me, and then asked him to coach. And now he owns 25% of my company. I mean, that's what Todd just said. Go put yourself out there. Go talk to the guys that you can learn from. You never know where it's going to end up.
Dude, I love that story. I remember you wearing the eye patch. So yeah, I think the interesting thing about it is the people that you all see on stages and interviews on Zoom now all have a heart of contribution. They all want to give back to this industry because the industry has been so good to all of us. And that's why I have people who say you spend a lot of time giving away your time. And I've got the platform, thankfully, with what Dave and I built, with the Friday Masterminds and in the Facebook community, where I get lots of eyeballs by doing just one, showing up in one place. And I know there's opportunity where you all live, all of you who are listening to this, those of you who made it this far in this interview have a heart to learn something, and hopefully we've added some value. But I think for me, I ran at Sales Mastery. There was a guy who was a legend in our market. His name is Mike Metz. And I'm pretty sure Mike's retired. In fact, I'm just going to write in my planner here, Mike Metz, because I'm going to call him. But I ran around that Palm Springs, that little 3 or 4 mile loop with Mike. And then I ended up in a mastermind with him and a great guy named RJ Crosby, another guy named Michael Tooker, who's not in the business. RJ still is. And we met up and we had hard conversations around finances during the financial crisis. I learned a ton from him. He was the number 1 loan officer in our city. And I went on a little run with him, and then was brave enough to follow up and have a conversation. And I learned so much from him at that time. I'd just go sit in his office and listen to him tell me stories. And his business was way up here, and mine was way down here. And I'd pull up in my Prius, and these guys all had fancy cars. And it was an interesting, an amazing time.
What would you do different? If there was one thing you could do different, what would it be?
One thing I could do different.
And I'll tell you mine. Mine has always been, I wish I had started a CRM and kept to it, like in serious detail from the very beginning.
Well, I think everyone can say that, right? I think my CRM was pretty good. I did a pretty good job of that. I think probably, gosh, it's so hard. I got lucky because I got a coach early on who helped me improve my time, because I think that would have been the biggest thing for me. Is I probably I wasn't, it still was a struggle for me to be not a workaholic. And so that I think is, probably one of the things that I got saved from. I think probably I just would have been better at the budget, because again, I could have avoided the financial crisis. We wouldn't be talking now. I'd probably own an island somewhere, with all the money I spent that I shouldn't have spent. And, I'd be sitting there drinking Mai Tais, or I should probably just be running in circles on it to keep in shape. And I think it's practice what you preach, because, and I say that out of love to my friends in the business who are struggling financially, who talk about it and teach it to their clients every day, but aren't living it to, again, how you show up there is how you show up everywhere. And I think it's an opportunity for us all to get better. And as I say that, I look at myself and say, well, where can I do that better? I think that's probably the biggest thing I would have, because it would have alleviated a lot of the other stresses that I ran into had I been a little more little paid a little closer to the pennies. That's one of the things my dad did that I didn't do. I took from my mom, who was back when in the old days, you had to write checks out of checkbooks to pay things. And my mom was like the person, if she had checks in the checkbook, she thought she had money. That's who I followed. And my dad was the other way around. And, ultimately in the end, I made some good choices along the way, as we talked about, but that's it.
One last question. What's been your biggest year, units and dollars?
My biggest year in units was that year 2015. What was weird about it was I was the number 23 loan officer in the country that year, according to Scotsman's Guide, for the loans I closed. But I left the business the next year to coach full-time for Building Champions. And when you coach for Building Champions, unlike most coaching organizations, you leave the business. And so the team then did during COVID, because I came back and secretly did during the COVID, like a little over 2 years, like 680 something loans. Over a 2 year period with alongside of the team. And so the team that year, I think we did 160 million. So, again, but we're small loan amounts here in Arizona. I think that's like 2 loans for you guys out in California. But it was a better year financially because I knew what to do with the money, right? I lived a different life at the time. And I think the other thing to remember too is, it's not all what you see on the internet, right? We all know on social media, everyone puts their best stuff up there. I tend not to post stuff. Like I was in Europe for 2 weeks and I didn't do any work email. I did no phone calls. Poor Dave, didn't even send me a text because he was such a good friend and wanted to give us that space. But I flew business class. I stayed in this massive suite at the W Hotel, all on frequent flyer miles, right? So, it looked like I lived this great, thing. For me, business class is it. Never been on a private jet, never will be probably. But ultimately, it was a great vacation. We paid for food, right? That was it. And so, again, there's other things, other strategies you can do to do these other things. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna one more story before we go. You mentioned RJ Crosby. He's in my mastermind group now, and he told me about this private jet, I guess group or deal, right? And it's $100 a month to be in the membership of it, and then every time you fly, it's $750 per person. I was like, I could afford that, and I finally did it. It was my first time ever.
Wow.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, so I didn't feel terrible because it was only $750, right? It's not even that much more than what first class would have been. And man, that is a lifestyle that is easy to get used to.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, all right. I got things to aspire to.
The chocolate chip cookies don't come in a bag that you have to tear. They come and they're soft and moist.
They're
and
fresh.
Incredible.
All right. That's all right. Well, all right. You'll just have to tell me more, but I guess maybe never say never, maybe I'll be flying on a private jet soon. But I think it's like most things though, right? I mean, you've earned it, you deserve it. And you're also not spending 10 grand to fly somewhere. Right. And so, it's always interesting because, I'm part of a wealth building group called Be Wealthy, and I got them to let me invite other loan officers to it. So I've got some really smart loan officer friends like Shayla Gifford and Josh Metal that are part of that group. And they're all investors. They're real estate agents who run big teams. And there's people in there who are just investors and flippers. And when you get around people who think that big, right, you get around people who have, 20, 30, 40 million dollar, $100 million portfolios. And you're like, holy smokes, like, what do I got this group I can aspire to be part of. You learn about things like that, and there's just different problems. And, again, these people wake up, they put their pants on one leg at a time, like the rest of us. Some of them probably drive really fancy cars. I wouldn't know because they don't talk about it. And so again, it's just the continual journey that I'm on, where I'm trying to surround myself with people who think bigger than me, people who have great relationships that I want to emulate, people like you, Dino, that I want to hang out with. And so I think we all have this opportunity in our business. So, what I would tell you, whether you're brand new, whether you've been doing this for a long time, first off, I'm going to call Mike and I'm going to thank him for what he did. I'll put RJ on my list too. I got so much out of that group and from those guys back during that time. And I've run into RJ since. So, I luckily see him probably once or twice a year at events. And, but there's probably someone that you should call and thank for something that they've done for you, whether it's in this business or something else. And then go back to what Dino said, find someone in the business who lives near you or doesn't. Maybe you can get someone to jump on Zoom with you, and have a conversation or even have a quick phone call. And I'll lead with that. at that seminar, that first Mortgage Originator Magazine seminar, there was a guy named Michael Bischoff. He's from Chicago. And Michael talked about your database, ironically. So you talked about CRM and the value of your database. And I was brave, because I'm not always brave, right? I'm an extrovert and introvert. And I ran up and introduced myself afterwards. And he said, hey, Todd, give me a call and I will talk to you. And I think back then, like if you called long distance, you actually had to pay money for a call at long distance. And he jumped on a phone call with me and gave me advice that really helped me build my business, because I couldn't have gotten that advice from anyone I was working with. And years later, I was at an event and I had the opportunity to see him up ahead of me and run out there, like literally got running and grabbed him by the shoulder. He didn't remember who I was, but I wanted to thank him for what he did. So when Dino tells a story like that, just know there are people out there today who will help you, who are truly the icons of the business today. And so I would be looking backwards, who can you thank? And I would be looking forwards, who can help you and reach out.
So we'll have it in the show notes, but Todd, how do people look you up and see what you're doing, and some of your interviews and all that?
Well, Deborah Bird, who runs my social media, Plug and Play, she would tell you to go to Instagram at Todd Bookspan and at Win by Noon. And I would just tell you Todd at winbynoon.com is my email address. And just like you, I've got someone who answers that email for me, so I'm spoiled as well. However, that's a great way to connect. And if you reach out to me on social and I don't respond for a few days, don't be offended. It just means I haven't been on social in a few days, because it's not me posting, it's Deborah and her team posting the content that I create or they created for me.
So guys, thank you so much. Again, it's Dino from The Way Podcast, Ethos Lending. And, we're here to equip, educate, and empower people. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Dino. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Todd.